Okay, so the tools I'm going to use are different threads and these clover needles. This is called variegated thread, and it's a thread, 6-stranded thread, which kind of varies in colour as you move throughout. You can get loads that do like rainbow effects or metallic effects, or you can get more subtle ones like this, which are the same sort of thing. In terms of fabric, you could do it on felt. Felt works really, really nicely for stitching into. You might need a slightly bigger needle, but again, it depends on the felt you're using. You can use any sort of thread. You might have knitting wool or crochet wool or any sort of thread that you've got to hand. And if you're doing the design onto fabric or felt, there are different ways you could do it. So we're going to do the star shape. So this is just a paper template, and you could just pin it on to the fabric, if I get it through there, and then you could just embroider kind of around the shape as is. Or you can use, just get rid of that thing mark, or you can use, you can get fabric markers, fabric pens, fabric pencils, and then you can just draw it onto there. So again, it's finding kind of what works for you. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do the running stitch in action, and to do that I'm going to finish off this star that I started stitching using running stitch. So first off, you're going to want to cut your thread. So you tend to buy embroidery thread like this, and it comes in 6 strands, and then what you want to do is find, if you take the end off, and you can find the end of the thread. I've got one that I'm already using on the go, so I'm just going to unwind it on here, which I just wrapped around some cardboard to keep it flat. So the length of your thread, you don't want it to be any longer than from your elbow to your hand, because obviously you're pulling the needle and thread, and if it's any longer you're going to have to pull it through multiple times, and then just cut it. And it's completely up to you how many strands you want to use depending on the effect you kind of want to give your embroidered piece. Generally I use 2 strands. The thread comes in 6 strands and I'm going to use 2, but if you want it to be more more obvious, is that the right word, then you'd use all 6. So if you want it to be more delicate, then you could use 1 strand. So to get the 6 strands out, let me see if I can just get this in focus here. So if you want to take out 2 strands in the 6, you kind of tap the end of the thread, and you can see it's just kind of splayed apart the individual threads. So I'm just going to pull out 1 thread, and you can tap it again if you need to kind of re-split them, and then pull out the 2nd thread, and then keep this because you'll use that again when you do another stitch. So then line these 2 ends back up, and you're just going to tie a knot. And there are several ways that people do it. Some people prefer not to use knots, especially if it's on your embroidery piece. I prefer to use a knot, I just find it stronger. So I'm just doing 2 knots, so I'll go through that. So I'm making a loop out of the thread, and then I'm just going to pass the end of the thread through the loop and pull. So I've made 2 knots, one on top of the other. Then I'm going to thread a needle. So I'm using these clover embroidery needles, and again, needle kind of comes down to personal preference and what you prefer to use. And so once you've got a needle out, and again I'd say just play with different needle sizes and different needle types to find what works for you, you're just going to put both of those 2 strands, the non-knotted end, through the eye of the needle, and then pull it through. So this is your tail. I'm not pulling it all the way down to the knot, I'm kind of leaving it, I don't know, maybe about 1/3 of the way. You can kind of sit there, and then you're ready to start embroidering. So let me move these bits out the way. Okay, so I've got this in a hoop, and again that's just for ease when I'm doing the video. If you don't have a hoop, don't worry, kind of just use what's to hand. So I've tied, you've got the knotted end here as you can see, and then this is the tail. So you're going to come through from the back of your work, and I've put this pin here because I know this is where I want to stitch up to complete my star, and then come back down. So the idea with running stitch is, if you imagine the rhythm when you're running, kind of that repetitive rhythmic kind of even steps, you're going to replicate that with the stitching. So I've pulled my needle and thread through from the back of the work. The knot is now stopping it, I can't pull that through. and I'm then going to take the needle back down. This is going to form your first stitch, and then you're just going to keep going, and I'm going at an even space here, so I'm doing an even stitch on the top and then an even space at the bottom, and then take it back through. And you can really get lost in the rhythm of doing this, and it's that sort of rhythmic, repetitive motion that can be really, really calming. So you just keep going up and down and form that even running stitch as if they were your feet running up and down on the pavement. I say that as somebody that doesn't run, by the way. And then when I get up to this pin here, I'm just going to take the pin out, and I'm just using that kind of as a guide for knowing where I wanted to go. I'm now going to bring my running stitch back down to meet this point here, and I'm still going at that even pace. And sometimes if it's not in a hoop, you can do several stitches at once, and I think it comes down to personal preference and kind of what you prefer to do. Just making sure I'm getting that even running stitch. And then the last one, and then we'll knot it on the back. Just making sure I get it in the right way. So that you've done an even running stitch, and you are literally just going in and out, in and out, in and out. And then once you're done, you're going to knot your thread on the back of your work. So this is it now on the back of your work, or sometimes it's called the wrong side of your work. That always sounds a bit schoolish, doesn't it? So I might call it the back of your work. So you can see here how you've got that running rhythmic stitch here, and if you turn it over, it should be replicated on the back, but you can see that you've got the knots here. So we're just going to tie, we started off with 2 knots, one on top of the other, so I'm going to create a loop here of thread, and I'm going to pass my needle through that loop, and then I'm just going to pull that, so that knot, and put my finger here so I can make sure the knot is flat against the back here, and then I'll just do it a second time, create a loop, pass your needle through, and you can see there the knots forming. I'm just going to hold my finger on and pull it, and then once you've done 2 knots, you can just cut it. I've just left a small bit of thread, and that is, hold it the right way up, that is your running stitch completed.